And as promised, we have Sharmila Whelan joining us now on ET Now, the Deputy Chief Economist at Asianomics Group. Hi Sharmila, always a pleasure chatting with you. Good evening, this is Ruchi Bhatia. I want to first ask you about the commentary that came in from the Fed yesterday saying that they're going to do whatever it takes to support the US economy, but still the worry coming in because Dow taking it on the chin, down almost 900 odd points. And we still don't know how long this fight against coronavirus is going to continue.
Well, the Fed is certainly all out there with its QE policies and promising to do, as you say, whatever it takes to see the economy through this period. But our view is that, a global recession is baked in the cake. We are looking at 5-6% contraction this year and marginal growth next year. And in the US, like elsewhere among advanced economies, it's what you're already seeing. You're seeing a collapse in corporate profitability. Due to the government enforced or mandated economic lockdowns that have brought businesses to a standstill. And for many sectors, corporate profits for the year have been wiped out. What the next wave is going to be is companies cutting back on spending, and we're talking about capex as well as on labor, and which we're also beginning to see in terms of rising unemployment rates. A third wave would be, that would follow on the back of the downturn in investment spending and corporate profits would be a credit crunch. So my view is that, the Fed is not going to be able to forestall a profit-led recession in the US through QE.
Absolutely, a profit-led recession. That's the word coming in from Sharmila. But Sharmila, in case, because we still don't have a vaccine for coronavirus, in case we do see a second wave of the cases coming up and rising, I'm sure we cannot shut the global economy once again. So what is going to be the solution in such a scenario?
Ruchi, your guess is as good as mine because, as we know, there's a lot of vaccines that are being tested right now, but and even some of them are in clinical trial, but there is nothing ready to come to market, right? And if we have a second wave that is significant, and we've seen a pickups in the number of cases in the US overnight in California, Florida, Texas. But if this starts translating into a significant second wave, I can't see how the government can avoid locking down the economy again. And, I think this is, the worst of all worlds, right? As it is, we're staring at recession in the eye. But if we get this stop-start of the economy because of, the COVID-19 virus outbreaks continue sporadically, it's an even gloomier outlook than the one that I've outlined.
Absolutely. Sharmila, I also want to understand from you, at this point of time where many central banks have already said that we will do whatever is necessary during these times. Having said that, if you see the firepower, at least with the central banks of the emerging markets, is very less as compared to maybe the US Federal Reserve or the ECB. I just want to understand from you, what are the options that that could be out of the box and that the central banks, at least in emerging markets, can look at, because this really is a once in a generation kind of a problem that we're looking at.
Ruchi, I'm going to have to disagree with you. I think if anybody has got monetary and fiscal, for that matter, fiscal policy flexibility, it is emerging market emerging economic governments, and in particular in Asia, the place where monetary policy has been well and truly exhausted, the whole toolbox, is in the advanced world, led by the US and Europe, right? And that's why they've kind of reverted. There's no scope for cutting interest rates. That's why they have reverted back to, overused, ineffective old tools that we've used for the last 10 years, which is QE. And, in the last 10 years, we've seen very lackluster growth out of the US. The US has grown on average since the global financial crisis by under 2% per annum in real terms, versus the amount of liquidity that has been put into the economy, because liquidity has not gone into the real economy, it's gone into asset prices. And that's a reflection of the fact that monetary policy is no longer a policy lever to stimulate the real economy. While if you take Asia, for instance, most of Asia, with the exception of Japan, didn't pursue, extraordinary monetary policy measures in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. Interest rates never sunk to zero, let alone negative rates. So there is scope for Asian central banks definitely to cut interest rates. And similarly, governments, from a fiscal point of view, with the exception of a few, including India, unfortunately, are in a much better position. I mean, you take the US. The US entered this current health crisis with a public debt to GDP ratio of 110% of GDP and a budget deficit of 4.5% of GDP.
Right. Sharmila, before I let you go, and I just want to understand from you, I don't know whether you look at India so closely, but I'm still going to, ask you this. In India, we've seen the Indian RBI going ahead with a lot of liquidity push as well. They're infusing a lot of liquidity into the system. Besides that, they've cut interest rates as well. At one point of time, everybody used to say that India is the bright spot in the gloomy global world. Where do things really stand now for India? 2 weeks ago, we did hear from Moody's when they downgraded India, rating reprieve coming in for India now, with S&P saying that they're going to maintain their ratings to BBB minus, but with a stable outlook. But they do raise concerns over India's debt sustainability. I want to understand from you, at a time like this, when most governments would look at spending more, India seems to be constrained because of this fiscal overhang. How do you see things really shaping up in India?
Ruchi, unfortunately, India's growth outlook is looking very, very negative. India entered the current crisis from a position of weakness. As we both know, growth had been slowing, economic activity had been slowing for 8 straight quarters. The corporate profit cycle had gone into reverse, and the private investment cycle was very, very weak. And even before the crisis, my view was that both the profit and the private investment cycle was going to take another leg down, and that India's next investment-led business cycle upswing was 4 to 6 quarters out. Now with COVID-19, which has is in the sense quite reminiscent of demonetization in terms of how it has been managed, India, the growth outlook for the next 2-3 years is pretty negative for me. The government India has relied on monetary policy more than fiscal policy, understandably, because the government doesn't have fiscal room. But the problem with the reliance on monetary policy, and if you go through all the measures that have been announced, a lot of them looks like basically fiscal monetary policy measures that have been dressed up as fiscal measures, where the singular purpose is to encourage states as well as companies to pile on debt. And my concern is that the hard work that India has undergone over the last 2 years of resolving the bad a loan problem in the public banking sector, public bank sector, as well as in the corporate sector. All that work is undone, and before we even get to the next business cycle upswing, we get another triple debt crisis because of rising NPLs in the banking system, rising debt levels in the corporate sector, and the deterioration in the public sector on the public sector balance sheet. So, unfortunately, the outlook for India is looking quite dim.
All right, the outlook for India is dim, even as India is staring at a triple debt problem. That's a word coming in from Sharmila. But Sharmila, always a pleasure chatting with you and getting in your perspective on the show. That was just Sharmila Whelan in conversation with ET Now.